It's an honor to me to introduce now the President of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, Mr. Robert Dijkgraaf, after the eloquent words of the mayor, who is not only the mayor, but a very good ambassador, not only of his city, but also of this new institute.
Ladies and gentlemen, great pleasure to say some words at this launch of the Institute here. As you say in the PhD graduation ceremony, it's an honor to be the first to congratulate you on this newly acquired authority. It's a pleasure to say something, and actually I was asked to speak about the excellence in multidisciplinary science, but in some sense the topic of my talk is something that is kind of difficult to translate into English. Often a Dutch phrase becomes shorter when it translated to English, but the Dutch phrase I wanted to use would be grenzen van de wetenschap, as not this property, because we are very lucky, I think, in the Dutch language in continental Europe to have one word for the full spectrum of the sciences, wetenschap. And of course, I will use science in that notion, but of course, in English, we'll have to indicate we are not only talking about the natural sciences. And then the word grenzen. I actually want to use it in several ways. The frontiers of science, moving into the unknown. I want to speak about the borders of science between the various disciplines. And I would say also talk about the limits of science. Because where does science stop and does, for instance, politics or policy take over? Now, this institute clearly focuses on the, I would say, the environmental crisis that we are definitely confronting. But I think underlying there's something which I like to call kind of the knowledge crisis or knowledge paradox. Because there's something rather remarkable in the nature of knowledge. By definition, in some sense, the world is getting more and more complicated, but it looks like we, in some sense, want to know less and less about it. And this has to do, I think, with the very nature of science is. It's probing deeper. We are kind of digging mines deeper into kind of the ground, addressing issues of greater complexity, integrating more different points of view. And by that process, I think, the path from our discovery, our insight, our concept, to basically the outside world, explaining what we're doing becomes longer and longer and longer. At the same time, because this very fine nature, the details, you get also more nuances, and in some sense you increase the power of science. So the technology literally invades our world. Most of us have in our pockets a computer which is many times more stronger and powerful than the one that was servicing the Apollo space program. We have literally, with medicines in our blood, in all possible ways, technology is invading our world. So we have a very strange situation where at some point, at the same time, science becomes basically infinitely far away and infinitely close by. And so I think also, in some sense, the separation between the science, our academic knowledge, and the outside world becomes kind of a fuzzy border. Knowledge becomes also more fragmented. And I think this is something that is a great challenge also to us academics, to kind of explain the effects that science and technology has on the world, not only causing problems but also being part of the solution. There's a nice phrase I like which the Dutch writer Rudy Kousbroek has used. He had said that many people think that the whistle of the train conductor is the force that moves the train engine. And but in some sense I think we often forget the strong forces that shape our society. There are many definitions of what technology is. I like two of them in particular. One is that it's everything that has been invented after you were born. And the second one is everything that doesn't work, which I think is also good. It's the open-ended nature of science and technology. But the more serious one is, of course, the main forces that shapes both nature and culture. Now, one thing, of course, that not only we have this image of science digging deeper, but I think also there's some kind of a complexity issue. In some sense, the biodiversity of the scientific field is growing, and the way it's organized, I want to say a few words about this, because here I think is where your institute will play a crucial role, in some sense in reorganizing our scientific knowledge, because I think that's something that has to be addressed. Now, another point, of course, also is that we have to some sense look far away. And it's always, I find, very difficult to explain people why you're so interested to go beyond the natural frontiers of knowledge. There's an image I like very much, which is actually an image going back to a phrase used by the Duke of Wellington, the Iron Duke, the one who conquered Napoleon. He said at some point, what's important in war and in life is looking what's at the other side of the hill. In some sense, trying to see what is the landscape behind the landscape that you already see. And I think actually going through these hills, going through these kind of invisible walls is the thing that we do. I mean, often to do this actually is a dramatic change. I think in some sense human beings are very ill-equipped to have such a dramatic change of point of view. There's a famous anecdote I like to tell about actually my own background, which is theoretical physics. When Albert Einstein was developing his theories, at the same time there was a very established figure, Henri Poincaré. Both gave lectures about relativity of space and time, and they interacted once in their life in a famous conference in Solvay 100 years ago. At that point, Einstein was describing his theory, and Poincaré asked, on which mechanics is your theory based? Because Poincaré could go far away, but not really to that point. And Einstein famously said, on no mechanics. And he basically was criticized that he started where others began. I think that's this kind of process in science that sometimes we go through some kind of a wall, end up in a different world and have a different perspective, is both our strength but it's also great difficult in some sense to find. And also I think we have difficulty kind of positioning science, of seeing the full relevance of it. And I would say certainly for this institute it's at least significant to distinguish three different, so to say, dimensions. Clearly there's the quality, it's the excellence of the scientific questions itself. There's the economic potential, and then there is the societal relevance. And the question is whether you in some sense can combine the three, or whether they are actually, are these parallel directions, are they orthogonal direction, how should we think about this? And I think in the Netherlands, I will say a few words about our excellence in the Netherlands in a few moments, but we have also kind of difficulty bringing these 3 points of view on knowledge together. Again, my famous opinion poll on this aspect, perhaps you have seen this once, is the questions that were asked a few years ago to all the citizens of the, at that time, 25 members of the European Union. And there were many questions were asked, but I want to pick out three. The first question was, do you believe that science and technological progress will help cure illnesses like AIDS and cancer? Do you believe in some sense in the healing powers of science? And the Netherlands was on the very top of that list, with 97% of the Dutch people feeling, yes, this can be done. The second statement was, by applying the most advanced technologies, our economy can become more competitive. So do we believe the economic argument? And here the outcome was not so positive, only 55% agreed, and I think we were fifth from the bottom. Germany was number one in that respect, so thinking of technology in its economic perspective. And the third was, in some sense, the value of science. Do you think your government should spend more on scientific research and, this was very honestly phrased, less on other things? And here the Netherlands came on the very bottom. Only 25% of our population agrees with this proposition. Less than, for instance, half the number than our direct neighbors, like in Belgium or Germany. So in some sense we are not connecting these three issues, I think, in a clever way. We do believe in its force and the power. We don't really see the economic impact, and we value it very low. Now, I think that if you would ask me here and now, which of the three aspects should be the predominant one? The internal quality, the economic relevance, or the societal impact? I would say certainly if we talk about public research, which is publicly funded, we need the support of the public. And so the societal impact might actually be leading. And I think that's a very important point that we have to show at various occasions. And we can ask the question whether in our universities and laboratories are we orienting ourselves in such a way to make the most impact? And what can we change from our own perspectives? That's another famous phrase, that the world has problems and the university has departments. And I think actually here at your university, you're trying to do this. I've always had this image of kind of trying to connect two cables, which have completely different electric system. And so you have difficulty finding the right way to plug, in some sense, the current of knowledge into the socket which will solve our problems. And in fact, the way we are thinking about the disciplines is something we think of them as static issues. But of course, if you look back in time, you see the various scientific disciplines moved and changed. In some sense, they do on a very slow scale, which is almost geological scale. You could use a metaphor that the disciplines are a little bit like the continents on the earth. They move around, sometimes they bump together. And in fact, if they do, this kind of geological active zone is also a place where you see very active research topics. In some sense, new mountains can form, and this would be one of the places where you can go. One of the questions I was asked, how do you feel about the point of excellence in this multidisciplinary issues? And I think actually here we have to still convince some people. People often feel that also being in between two fields could be kind of a very comfortable zone, because it's always the other people who think that you have great quality. And I feel there's a lot of kind of preconceived ideas about the quality or lack of quality in various disciplines within the academic community. In fact, I've once spoken about the curse of applications. There are certain fields which I would say suffer from the fact that they are useful. We have in some strange mathematical model, I think, where the quality of our research plus our impact adds up to 100%. So you feel in some sense there is the one goes on the quality. The quality cannot come together with applications. And for instance, there are fields, I'm not talking about exclusively about environmental sciences, but there are other examples. For instance, certainly people who are doing work in information technology have this problem. Everybody is completely convinced of the use of it, and they forget that there are very deep fundamental questions in that field going back to people like Gödel and Turing.